So now we begin to talk about more directly the journey to the constitutions which ended in 1990, the stages that marked its progress. First of all, I think we should mention something that was lost in the cloud of oblivion. And that was the 1965 General Chapter produced a descriptive definition of the order Tentam definitiones proportius descriptionis ordinis nostris, an attempt at defining or rather describing our order, and of the Cistercian monk, an attempt to define a Cistercian monk. These just disappeared up into the clouds. Nobody has ever heard of them. It's very difficult to find a copy of them. And they had absolutely no influence in subsequent years. So it's very interesting that people can work on things, they can devote themselves, they can discuss, they can compromise, they can arrive at a suitable solution, and bye-bye, it's never heard or seen again. So just to avoid any tendency to fundamentalism, to think that the text of the Constitution is just simply a text, you take it as it is and understand it as it is, we need to understand something of what went into its composition. And so I have made a short list of the relevant documents. I'm not suggesting that you read all of these before we make any progress, but I'm suggesting that you acknowledge that each of these had something to contribute to the final product. We may not very well be aware of it. It may have simply been one word or one topic or one constitution that was impacted, but that people were talking about it for a long time. So, a short list of relevant documents. The 1967 General Chapter Minutes. A new Charter of Charity of the Order of Cito, published under the aegis of the Commission for the Revision of the Constitutions, mainly the work of Basil Pennington, published in Cistercian Studies, if I'm not mistaken, but dating from the 14th of April 1968. The 1969 General Chapter Minutes, and there are the sections. The 1971 General Chapter Minutes, the 1974 General Chapter Minutes, the minutes of the Concilium Generale, 1975, the minutes again, 76, the Law Commission, 76, the 77 General Chapter Minutes, the minutes of the Law Commission, 79, and 80 again, and the 1980 General Chapter Minutes. The Constitutions of the Cistercians of the Strict Observance Masculine Branch, also called, subsequently, Project 1. This was the first attempt to produce a set of constitutions. I doubt that you will be able to find a copy. It was distributed at the General Chapter, but not discussed, as I understand. So that is an important pathway, Project 1. It's eventually attaining a degree of visibility. Oh, some more documents. The minutes of the Concilium Generale in 81, the Law Commission in 82, the Concilium Generale in 82, the legislative collection for monks, which was Project 2, which appeared in January 1983. Then one of the things that mainly Bernard Johnson was responsible for, that he said, this time we will set up a particular group to evaluate Project 2. And that group was composed of Bernardo Oliveira, Thomas Davis, Colette Friedlander, a doctorate in canon law, nun of Laval, and myself. And we met in Conyers in January 1983, at the same time as the Code of Canon Law was promulgated. So we were trying to take that into consideration as well. But that was an important enough thing, I boastfully say, because it circulated a number of criticisms of the Project 2 that had been done by the Law Commission and set the way for something else. Then there was the Law Commission in July of that year, the Concilium Generale meeting at Fa, Tobetz, in Japan in September 1983. And one of the things that Concilium Generale did was to commission me to write Project 3. And so then you had the Constitutions and Statutes of the Order of the Stations of Strict Observance, which appeared in December 1983, Project 3. Then the report of the Law Commission, which I attended in Schoolmont. And then the working papers for the 1984 General Chapter, the emendations and proposals regarding Project 3, a whole book of them came out. Then the minutes of the 1984 General Chapter, then the amendments and other proposals on the Holyoke text, and then the General Chapter of Abbesses, the report of the Law Commission, a very influential talk given by Canadian Father Morrissey on constitutions and canon law, the minutes of the Nuns Chapter at Escorial in 1985, and of course the important ones were Project 2 and Project 3, the 1984 General Chapter and the 1985 General Chapter, and the text coming from that. More Law Commission, mixed meeting of preparation, Law Commission again, working papers for the 1987 General Chapter, the Law Commission, a collection put out by the United States region towards the summit, papers in preparation for the mixed general meeting of the Cistercians of the Strict Observance, as we were known then, to be held in Rome, published from Gethsemane, 1987. And this was a text of the constitutions with all the suggested modifications integrated. The minutes of the General Chapter in Rome, 3 studies that were presented to it, the meaning of the Divine Office, the Conventual Chapter, and Solitude as seen in the Fathers of our Church, a working booklet on the constitutions, the minutes of the 87 Mixed General Meeting, the minutes of the joint meeting of the Central Commission, the minutes of the Law Commission at Engelcell, minutes of the Joint Commission. And so particularly the minutes of the 1987 and the texts that emerged from there. Now, the purpose of listing all these things is just to get over to you the point that the constitutions just didn't pop out of nowhere, that there was a lot of work being done in different countries at different levels with different purposes by different people that had to be taken into consideration. Some of it had direct input into the history of it, but mostly the input is just simply fairly slight in raising questions, in providing a track through alternative propositions and so forth. So, having said that, let's go back to look at some of these things, and particularly going back to the Concilium Generale. You don't have to read all those documents, but to appreciate the fact that they exist, they are there, that they contributed their own thing, and that a fundamentalist approach to the constitutions is not going to yield very much. In October, this is just going into a lot more detail. In October 1966, the Central Commission commissioned a report on the revision of the constitutions for the 1967 General Chapter. A vote passed addressed to the Pontifical Commission for the Revision of the Code of Canon Law, pleading for the recognition of the special character of monastic institutes, that we weren't to be bundled up together with the Sisters of Mercy and the Jesuits, but rather to see that monastic institutes had their own tradition, their own patrimony, their own language, their own rituals, from which their identity was built. A special commission was formed to deal with the question of the new constitutions. In other words, to establish the scriptural and theological bases of the Cistercian monastic life. The scriptural and theological bases of the Cistercian monastic life. Without excluding the Charter of Charity, the principle was accepted that the rule of Benedict was to remain the fundamental basis of our Cistercian law. Now, I've mentioned this a couple of times. It is a kind of aspiration that many people had, that we just simply take the rule and say, here is the rule under which we wish to serve. This is what we follow. But it just doesn't work out very conveniently when you're trying to establish the norms for receiving an excommunicated member back into the community, or when you're trying to establish how much a local superior may spend without getting permission of the general chapter, and so forth. It's a nice aspiration to say we simply follow the rule of St. Benedict, but it's delusional. But it keeps cropping up repeatedly. And then, as I've already mentioned, there was drawn up a new Charter of Charity, mainly by Basil Pennington. And his first part was consecrated life. The inner meaning of Cistercian life, personal call, scriptural presentation, ecclesial aspects, our response, faith, hope, love, realization of baptismal potential, our significance in the Church, individual spiritual growth, spiritual liberty, participation in the Paschal Mystery, extension of Christ's kingdom, union with the Church, value as a sign, and then the Cistercian vocation, its specificity, historical monasticism, Cistercian life, and then contemporary values, personal fulfillment, liberty of spirit, oneness to God, openness to God, radical asceticism, cenobitism, human balance, and presence in the world, sacramental service. Well, I suppose it's a good effort by mainly an individual to put all these things together. But the fact of the matter is, it's not constitutions, and it went down like a lead balloon in many regions. For all its admirable qualities, that it didn't simply have the jizz that stirred people up. It simply, to some, it appeared like an effort to list everything possible that had anything to do with monastic life in some kind of evolutionary order, but that didn't have much of charm or animation to it. And so, for the most part, it simply disappeared. It remains in the list of sources, but for the most part it was ignored. But what the document achieved was a necessary broadening of the question from the sphere of law governing behaviour to the underlying beliefs and values. It tempted, to use Gadmerian terms, a fusion of horizons. This thing that Paul VI had asked for, that a harmony between spiritual and juridical content. And the new Charter of Charity tried to do that and achieved it to some extent. At least it alerted people to some of the aspects of it with regard to monastic tradition on the one hand and teaching of Vatican II on the other. It's difficult to know why the new Charter of Charity was little appreciated and quickly abandoned by the 1969 chapter. May well have been personal issues. If somebody pushes too hard on a question, people tend to resist. It may have been the normal chapter politics that went into play. Many abbots were unfamiliar with the idiom used and uncomfortable with the idea of too much theory, fearful that undesirable practical consequences might suddenly be deduced from it. More fundamentally, the literary and canonical genre of the document is not clear. And again, I'd have to say that because it was written in English, it was probably already suspect for French-speaking abbots. These problems could have been solved if the text had become the focus of sustained dialogue and undergone patient reworking. It could have served, for example, as the opening section of the constitutions, but they were just unwilling to work with it. Instead, the chapter inclined to suggestions made that the new constitutions be elaborated by means of declarations on the rule of Benedict in the Charter of Charity. This was reaffirmed in the 1974 chapter. As I said, it keeps coming up and coming up and coming up, but not a very practical thing, and slightly delusional. There's a strong resistance to the 1925 style of text, and no clear perception of what might serve to replace it. So now we go to look at Project 1. The General Chapter gave the Law Commission the mandate of providing a draft constitutions to be started without delay. The draft constitution, singular, note, was presented to the 1980 chapter but not studied. And this was the form that it took. It had the fundamental text, was the rule of Benedict, the Charter of Charity, and the Declaration on Cistercian Life. That was going to be printed at the front of the constitutions. Then there were declarations, which are constitutions, on the government of the order, the vows and the observances, the entrance into the order. And then there were to be norms. The government of the order, again, observances, and entrance into the order. But the primary focus, as you can see, is on the government of the order. 14 pages deal with the government of the order, 2 pages on observances, 2 pages on novitiate and so forth. And on the declarations, 4 pages more than either the other 2 sections. So it was all about government of the order, which the Law Commission was probably most interested in. Why did it fail? Well, the draft was the fruit of much labour. It entailed a canonical review of former legislation in the light of post-conciliar requirements and of expected changes in the forthcoming Code of Canon Law. It attempted to address the new juridical questions posed by changes in the life of the order. And it synthesised recent decisions of the General Chapter and integrated them within the basic text. It was proposed in a spirit of dialogue. No attempt was made to short-circuit the process of consultation. And yet it failed. So all these good things about it, yet it failed. If Project 1 failed to win acceptance as a working basis for further development, it was mainly because it simply embodied the incompatible directives given to the Law Commission by successive General Chapters. In other words, the General Chapters throw out these things and do this and do this and do this. And then the Law Commission has them all on the table and scratching their heads and saying, how are we going to put all these things together? and it's a great challenge, and too much of a challenge that you need to go back to the start. And the spare juridical style is exactly what the chapters demanded, but it was also the reason why Project 1 was rejected. So, in one sense, the best way to implement the desires of the chapter is to ignore anything that the chapter says, because often it speaks with multiple voices, which are not synthesized, which are not harmonized, but they're left in their discordancy. And trying to find a way to harmonize them from outside the chapter is exceedingly difficult. And so, well, when Project 1 fell on its face, or fell into disuse, or nobody paid very much attention to it, then Project 2 was cooked up by the Law Commission. Project 1 generated much comment from the nuns and monks and nuns, superiors and regents, including some plans for extensive rewriting. So the Law Commission got this feedback and decided to initiate a second draft according to a new plan. So they had a new plan, but again, as we'll see, the problem with it is when you have a table full, covered with suggestions coming from all sorts of sources, and trying to harmonise these, all you produce is a mishmash, and something that ends up being fairly unsatisfactory. So again, they had the basic text, which is the Rule of Benedict and the Chapter of Charity and declarations on Cistercian life. Well, this is what the chapter wanted, so they gave it back to them. And then the way they set it up was the primary and secondary code, constitutions and statutes. And following this order, the Cistercian monastery, A, including vocation, community, observance, and government. Government has been somewhat demoted, you noted. And then the Cistercian order, the nature of the order, service between monasteries, central organs. So it's a much better plan in the sense that it comes to grips with what is more immediate in the experience of monks and nuns, although at this stage it was only mainly directed to the monks because their chapter was first. And it's not wholly concentrated on government and administration. So some of the differences between Project 1 and Project 2. In Project 2, the fundamental texts were retained at the beginning, but the text changed the order of the principal sections, treating the local community and its life before passing on to the level of the order and its government. I think this is extremely important, that we're talking to the place where the lived experience of Cistercian life is effected. It's not at the level of the order, it's at the level of the local community. And so the result of this, it created a less top-heavy impression, coming down all about the government of the order. The first chapter, which presented the Cistercian vocation, was the seed which developed a much longer introduction to the constitutions. And a serious effort was made to move away from purely juridical presentation of Project 1 to include spiritual elements, especially when discussing matters where this is more appropriate. And thirdly, the marginal references to the scriptures, the council documents, the Rule of Benedict, St. Bernard's letter to the monks of Alp, and other sources were added. So this brings us to the point where we've had various abortive efforts. We've had the Basil Pennington's proposal, a new Charter of Charity. Then you have Project 1, which was the work of the Law Commission, and then Project 2. And it was Bernard Johnson, as I understand, who wanted this project to be submitted to a committee to look at its value in a kind of systematic way. And these are they. This is Bernard Johnson and the evaluation group taken at Conyers. In case you can't recognise them, there's Thomas Davis and Bernard Johnson and Colette Friedlander, Bernardo Oliveira and myself. And we actually did some work. And this is us pretending to work. I think that's where we'll leave it off for the moment, and we'll talk in greater detail about the response to Project 2 in the next part of this series. So that's all for now.